Hey Vikings Nation, what's going on? You already know the energy is different today, because we've got breaking Minnesota Vikings news that might not be grabbing all the headlines, but trust me, it matters more than people think. And here's the teaser. A former Vikings starter just landed with a team that could quietly turn him into one of the smartest under-the-radar pickups of the entire 2026 season. We're talking about a move that might look small on the surface, but when you dig deeper, it could have ripple effects across the NFC. So stay with me because we're going to break this down like true fans. Passion, detail, and real talk. And I want to hear from you. Do you think this former Viking is about to prove Minnesota made a mistake? Or is this just business as usual? Drop it in the comments as we go. Alright, let's set the stage. Free agency has been moving fast, and by now, most of the big names are off the board. The Minnesota Vikings made their moves, filled some gaps, and reshaped parts of the roster heading into 2026. But as always, it's not just about who arrives. It's also about who leaves. And sometimes those departures don't hit hard immediately, until those players pop up making noise somewhere else. That's exactly the kind of situation we're looking at right now. A familiar face from the Vikings' defensive line is officially on the move again. And this time, the fit is turning heads. Now let's talk about the reality of the NFL. Even players who once held starting roles, guys who contributed week in and week out, can struggle to find the right situation after leaving a team. It's not always about talent. Sometimes it's scheme. Sometimes it's timing. And sometimes it's just about landing in the perfect environment where everything clicks. And when that happens, that's when you see those "wait, how did that team get him?" moments. And Vikings fans, this might be one of those moments. So here's the news. Jonathan Bullard, former Minnesota Vikings defensive lineman, has officially signed with the Dallas Cowboys for the 2026 season. Yeah, that's the move. And at first glance, you might think, Dallas? Do they really need more defensive line help? But stick with me because once we break this down, you'll start to see why this could actually be a very smart signing. The deal itself is a one-year contract worth up to $2.5 million. Not a massive investment, not a headline-grabbing contract, but that's exactly what makes it interesting. This is the kind of low-risk, potentially high-reward move that smart teams make when they're trying to build depth and stay competitive deep into the season. And let's be real, depth in the trenches can make or break a defense when injuries start piling up. Bullard's journey is also worth revisiting. He joined the Minnesota Vikings back in 2022 and stuck around for 3 seasons, carving out a role as a reliable contributor on the defensive line. He wasn't always the flashiest player, but he brought consistency, experience, and toughness, qualities every defense needs, even if they don't always show up on the stat sheet. Before Minnesota, he was a third-round pick in the 2016 NFL Draft, entering the league with solid expectations and gradually building his career year by year. After his time with the Vikings, Bullard moved on to the New Orleans Saints in 2025. That's where things got a bit more challenging. He played all 17 games, which shows durability, something teams absolutely value. But he only started 6 of those games, signaling a reduced role compared to his time in Minnesota. And statistically, it was a quieter season. 26 total tackles and 2 pass defenses across 327 defensive snaps. Not bad, but not exactly game-changing production either. So the question becomes, what happened? Was it the system, the rotation, or just a tough year overall? Because we've seen it before. Players leave one system, struggle a bit, then bounce back in the right situation. And that's where Dallas enters the picture. The Cowboys have been aggressive this offseason when it comes to building up their defensive front. They're not just looking for stars, they're stacking depth. And Bullard fits perfectly into that strategy. He's experienced, he understands multiple roles, and he doesn't need to be the guy to make an impact. He just needs to do his job and do it well. There's also a really cool personal angle here. Bullard grew up a Cowboys fan back in Shelby, North Carolina. So this isn't just another contract. It's a bit of a full-circle moment for him. Playing for the team you rooted for as a kid? That hits different. And sometimes that kind of motivation can bring out a whole new level of performance. Now let's talk competition. In Dallas, Bullard isn't just walking into a guaranteed role. He's going to have to earn his snaps. One of the names to watch is Otito Ogbonnia, a younger player who's also fighting for time on that defensive line. This is where things get interesting because competition breeds performance. And if Bullard can push for playing time, that means he's bringing something valuable to the table. For Vikings fans, this is one of those bittersweet moments. You know what Bullard can do. You've seen his effort, his consistency, his presence in the rotation. But at the same time, you understand why the team moved on. That's the business side of football. Still, you can't help but wonder, what if he finds that extra gear in Dallas? Because if he does, people are going to start looking back and asking questions. Was he underutilized? Was he a better fit than people realized? Or is this just the natural evolution of a veteran finding the right spot late in his career? And that's the beauty of the NFL. Stories like this unfold every single season. Looking ahead to 2026, Bullard has a real opportunity here. With a manageable contract and low expectations, the pressure isn't overwhelming. But the upside? Absolutely there. If he delivers solid performances, rotates effectively, and contributes in key moments, he could easily outperform that contract value. And teams love players who give them more than they paid for. So Vikings Nation, now I've got to ask you, what do you think about this move? Do you believe Jonathan Bullard is about to surprise people in Dallas? Or was Minnesota right to move on when they did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your takes. And if you're loving this kind of deep dive Minnesota Vikings news, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with every Vikings fan you know. Because we're just getting started, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Skol. And here's where things get even more interesting, Vikings Nation, because when you really zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this move isn't just about one player changing teams. It's about how the Minnesota Vikings are evolving as a roster heading into 2026. Every offseason, decisions are made that don't fully make sense until months later. Letting a veteran walk, choosing not to re-sign a familiar name, those moves can feel small in March but massive in November. So the real question is, what does Bullard's departure say about the direction of the Vikings' defensive line? Because let's be honest, Minnesota has been trying to get younger, faster, and more explosive up front. The league is changing, offenses are quicker, quarterbacks are more mobile, and defenses have to adapt. And sometimes that means moving on from solid, dependable veterans in favor of upside and athleticism. But here's the risk: you lose experience. You lose that guy who knows where to be, who rarely makes mistakes, who holds the line when things get chaotic. That's what Bullard brought during his time with the Vikings. He wasn't always the headline, but he was part of the foundation. And those are the players you only truly appreciate once they're gone. Now flip it over to Dallas again. The Cowboys aren't asking Bullard to be a star. They're asking him to be reliable. And that's dangerous in the best way possible. Because when you put a veteran into a role where he can just focus on doing his job, without pressure to carry the defense, that's when efficiency shows up. That's when you start seeing those quietly dominant stretches, where a player doesn't fill the stat sheet but constantly disrupts plays. And if that happens, Vikings fans are going to notice. Let's also talk scheme fit for a second, because this is something that doesn't get enough attention in most Noticias dos Minnesota Vikings news discussions. Dallas runs a defensive system that values versatility along the line. Players who can shift, adjust, and handle different responsibilities are extremely valuable. And Bullard? That's exactly the kind of player he's been throughout his career. He's not locked into one role. He can adapt. He can rotate. He can fill gaps when injuries hit. That flexibility might be the exact reason Dallas targeted him in the first place. And here's another layer: motivation. You've got a veteran player, coming off a quieter season, signing a short-term deal, joining his childhood favorite team, and fighting for snaps. That's a perfect storm for a comeback-type season. Because players in that situation, they play with something to prove. They play like every snap matters, like every rep could define their future. And if Bullard brings that energy into Dallas' defensive rotation, he could become one of those mid-season stories everyone starts talking about. Where did this guy come from? Even though Vikings fans already know the answer, now let's bring it back home one more time. For the Minnesota Vikings, this is also about trust in their current roster. Letting Bullard walk means the coaching staff believes in the guys stepping into those roles. It means they see potential, development, and upside in the new rotation. And that's exciting, but it's also a gamble. Because if those younger players don't deliver, if depth becomes an issue, moves like this get reevaluated very quickly. That's the reality of the NFL. Every decision gets judged, eventually. So as we head into the 2026 season, keep this name in mind, Jonathan Bullard. Not because he's guaranteed to dominate, but because he's in the exact kind of situation where surprises happen. And if there's one thing we know as Minnesota Vikings fans, it's that the league never runs out of unexpected storylines. All right, Vikings Nation, I'm throwing it back to you one more time. Be honest. Would you have kept Bullard for depth? Or are you confident in the direction the Vikings are heading right now? Let's get that conversation going in the comments. And if you want more Minnesota Vikings news, breakdowns, and real fan-to-fan analysis just like this, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because when the next big move drops, and you know it's coming, we're gonna break it down together. Skol, and I'll catch you in the next one.